Good morning, friends. In today's video, I am going to be talking to you all about the latest reality TV craze that is taking over the eldritch airwaves of the Omniverse, I suppose, the Shiftverse. I'm going to be telling you about something that is fascinatingly like a jump chain without actually being a jump chain, and I will be explaining the differences as I understand them. And of course, the creator of this concept is one of my friends, and they are someone who I am in a campaign with, who I have created a prime, and I'm using air quotes, but that is this thing's version of a player character. And it's honestly a very fun time. If you like jump chains, which a good number of the newest people to join my channel do, you probably will be interested in this concept. But allow me to talk to you about the Shiftverse. Done multiple takes of this video, of this part of this video, and it's fun trying to explain something that is both a D&D like campaign, especially if D&D is the only TTRPG you've ever heard of, which is the case for a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with that. And also trying to explain a whole new setting to someone, because a lot of cases, if someone's trying to explain a D&D campaign to you, you might know the setting, but I'm having to explain everything, and that's a lot of fun. So I'm going to focus on my character before I expand into the broader setting. In the Shiftverse, I play a character named Jonathan Mondragon. Jonathan is a non binary doctor originally from a town in Puerto Rico who got isekai'd to a whole new world and in the process received superpowers. That is the very, very, very basic concept that Shai, the game master, and I, the player, agreed on. There are multiple other players in this particular world, but we do not adventure together. And in fact, our campaigns are so set apart that they are occurring on different days in the same continuous world that is reacting and adapting to us. All of the player characters, at least to my knowledge so far in this particular world, are primes. A prime is a person, sometimes but not always, from Earth, who was selected by eldritch forces beyond their comprehension to participate in a effectively reality television show. It is remarkable how similar this concept is to jump chains, given that Shai, the person behind the concept, has never heard of jump chains up until I started making videos about them. But both I and another player character in Shai's campaigns in the same setting, to my knowledge, but in a very different part of the world, knew about jump chains. And in fact, when I first started learning about jump chains, when I had heard about them for a while and was already a member of the jump chain community, I jokingly mentioned to Shai how similar the concept of jump chains is to Ta Mando. Not to Ta Mando, but to the Shiftverse. And it's worth noting that there's not actually that many similarities, but potentially omnipotent eldritch beings abducting people to send them on adventures, to participate in effectively reality television shows for the purpose of entertainment, is kind of the basic backdrop for both jump chains and the Shiftverse. It's worth noting that there are incredibly significant differences. Among other things, a shift in the Shiftverse, which is the term for, it seems to be the term, as has been explained to both my character and to me, for how long a stay in a particular setting lasts, is a vastly different time frame from how it is for a jumper to visit a setting during a jump. Jumpers visiting settings for a jump usually lasts a decade. It can be longer than that, it can be shorter than that, but a decade is the standard unit of time for which a jumper will stay in a setting. And primes do not stay in places for decades. They can stay in them. They can stay in them for decades. They will not stay in one unless they get absolutely slaughtered for a decade. They will probably be staying in places for, it seems like, at least a human lifetime, probably a little bit more than that. And it's also worth noting that jumpers retain their powers and stuff when they go to a new setting. That is the very basic concept behind a jumper, someone who goes from place to place acquiring and keeping new abilities. That is not always and not universally going to be the case with primes. Primes have the ability to, at least as it's been explained to me, pick and choose new power sets between shifts, and they will take those abilities with them moving forward. And also, primes don't always remember the events of their last shifts, whereas, barring drawbacks, a jumper will remember the events of their last jump. So while there are conceptual similarities between a shift, between a prime and a jumper, and between the Shiftverse and jump chains, they are not tremendously similar. They are just similar conceptually. They're certainly not all that similar in practice, although it has certainly been fun for Shy and I to make jokes where we talk about the similarities between the two. It is honestly a very fun time. I do very much enjoy the serious style and nature of a shift. And it's worth noting that not every single prime is going to have the same experience of the particular setting that my character, Jonathan Mondragon, is a part of. My character is one of the two primes associated with their nation, the nation of Kanda, that has had the roughest go of things, certainly from the start, because my character did not get dropped off in a area similar to where the other people that they're aware of got dropped off. They did not get dropped off in a cool Roman city, because the nation of Kanda is it's a sort of analog for Rome, kind of. And there's backstory reasons for that are important, but it is certainly Rome-like, but with like actual magic and actual monsters, and also actual aliens, including but not limited to the player characters, all of whom, at least in the context of the nation of Kanda, are themselves reincarnations of the founders, who were a set of superheroes, for lack of a better term, and demigod-like beings who were summoned to the world of Ta Mando a millennia and a half ago and helped establish the nation of Kanda from a group of tribes that were struggling to survive, and from a specific set of people who sacrificed their flock in order to beseech the gods to call for help, and the gods responded by sending the original founders. Jonathan Mondragon specifically is both a doctor and the reincarnation of Genevieve Green, a woman known as the Maiden of Health. And the Maiden of Health was a World War II nurse back on Earth, whose reincarnation was a Puerto Rican doctor who was born either in the early 1990s or late 1980s. I can't remember the exact year, although I know that it is possible to look on my stuff and do the math. I don't feel like doing that for the purpose of this video. This is supposed to be a very brief overview. We do not know, or at least Jonathan does not know, a tremendous amount of information about Genevieve Green, despite the fact that we've been doing this campaign for a couple of years now. In-game, only a few months have passed since Jonathan first arrived, but at the same time, Jonathan has begun to awaken their healing abilities. They've begun to establish ties with the rest of the nation of Kanda, because the area that they arrived in, Soteri, is a very distant colony. It is a colony on the southernmost tip of the continents that the adventure so far has taken place on. The adventure so far has taken place on a single continent, although Jonathan has gone region hopping thanks to a device located in one of the regions of Soteri, in one of the areas right beside it. They have been able to go to a very different part of the world map known as the Place of Peace. And as of the time that I'm making this video, Jonathan is the fastest prime, at least for the nation of Kanda, and is able to, in theory, travel the world map because, among other things, they are a Superman XP who has some level of Superman speed. They are nowhere near as fast as Superman actually is, but they're capable of traveling at more than twice the speed of sound, and they can fly, and they don't need sleep. So they are the only character who, as of this moment, can use brute force to travel to a different region in the world. Although they have not really done that, they've technically left Soteri both magically and on their own two little feetsies to travel to a different part of the main area of the map that they are on. They've gone from Soteri, which is their home base and where they were summoned, to Navokanda, which is an area where the descendants of the last group of people from Kanda to come to this part of the world are currently living, following a series of disastrous battles and also calamitous events, such as interacting with local gods that did not go very well, and also interacting with locals that did not go very well. But now that I've explained part of the basic concept behind Jonathan, I'll go and talk a little bit more about the Shiftverse itself and primes. So, as you can see now, we are on a World Anvil site for Ta Mando. We're not going to explore this website for the purpose of this video, although we certainly could, but I simply wanted to put this up on the screen, and I'm going to be putting a link to it in the video description so that way people can go and see it. I personally think that Ta Mando is an incredibly fascinating world. I'm a big fan of both my own adventures and the adventures of other players set in this world. I honestly think that it's been such a great campaign so far, and I'm so delighted to be keeping it going with Shy, and also to eventually interact with other players. I think that there's a lot of really fun and really neat ideas here. This is absolutely worth exploring. I'll also be putting a link to the Discord in the video description for anyone who really likes this video and anyone who wants to explore it. But effectively, the Shiftverse is Shy's Omniverse as far as I understand it. I understand that there are different stories that do not appear to take place in the Shiftverse, but for a lot of purposes as far as interactive stuff goes, this is probably the grandest of Shy's settings that is known to me. There are certainly at least parallel different versions of Earth that exist in a grand scale on this particular multiverse, omniverse. I'm not sure which of those two terms would be more appropriate. And in fact, Jonathan has encountered characters from other Earths who have confirmed as much from the way that they have spoken to him and the things that they have asked him. I'm using he, him pronouns. Jonathan uses both, although they have a strong preference for they, them, in much the same way that when I was first discovering that I was non-binary, I used both, although I had a preference for they, them. There are multiple different versions of Earth, and primes, at least the majority of primes that Jonathan is aware of, seem to have come from Earth or an alternate Earth. Jonathan has confirmed that multiple different primes came from the same Earth as them, and in fact, several different primes have confirmed that they are actually aware of Jonathan, even in an Earth context, which is something that is very interesting to Jonathan. It's worth noting that there actually is another player character who Jonathan has not met, whose character actually met Jonathan prior to becoming all shifted and becoming a prime. And that is something that will hopefully, that is something that player, myself and Shy, will hopefully get to experience and discuss at some point in the future. It's not something that's super important. This character was another doctor whose campaign is taking place, funnily enough, not tremendously far from where Jonathan's campaign is taking place. Another distant region, disconnected from the main area, from the main continuous body of land that is considered a part of Kanda. Their campaign is taking place in a port city with direct ties to a very mysterious region of the world, whereas Jonathan's campaign is taking place in what was intended to be a trading city and a trading region, and what is very slowly actually starting to become a trading area and a trading region, through means that were entirely disconnected from its intended origins. I am going to talk a very tiny bit about the history of Soteri because I think it's so fascinating. And then we're going to be closing out the video now that we have gotten a chance to go and talk a little bit more about the Shiftverse and primes and all of that fun stuff. And it's worth noting that I am almost 100% sure. I am, in fact, as far as I can reasonably be sure, 100% sure, that there are plenty of primes from non-Earth worlds. Ultimately, one of Jonathan's objectives is to make sure that one of their wives, their first wife, becomes a prime and goes on the rest of their omniversal journey with them. Jonathan has gone to great lengths to transform this woman from a normal Ta Mando human into a creature like John, at least as like John as someone can be without themselves being a prime, into another Kryptonian, but make it Shiftverse. I cannot remember, and I'm not sure how to pronounce the word that Shy and I decided on. I will be talking about that in a later video on this topic because I have plans to do multiple videos talking about the Shiftverse, but effectively a Kryptonian for all intents and purposes. And that has worked. To Jonathan's great credit, that was their first of their extremely significant goals that they were able to successfully accomplish. Absolutely love that for them. But now we are going to go ahead and discuss something else for a split second before we go ahead and end out today's video. Hello! As you can see, we are still on the Ta Mando world anvil, but now we are on a map. It's worth noting and worth understanding that this is a map of the world as understood by the people of Kanda, which is very important information and also means that even though the map is correct, there's a lot of areas that are not on the map that should be on a map of the world, just because the people of Kanda do not understand the full scope of the world that they live in. Certain characters, Jonathan and a few other primes included, do understand the larger scope of the world, at least conceptually, even if they can't quite picture everything on an extremely detailed level. But I'm going to go ahead and read the little blurb before we start talking about Soteri. The Maiden of Health arrives. Desperate to maintain the colony of Soteri and hold out against the onslaught of the native Kabori, Meningitis the Mysterious did what he could and used his grand magical prowess to summon forth the Maiden of Health when all seemed lost. Okay, so important history time. There is a rich character in the main core of Kanda, whose name I cannot pronounce. I'm going to be completely honest. There's lots of names in this setting that if I tried to pronounce them, I would not be able to, so I'm not even going to try it. It's well known among my friends who play D&D with me, Shy included, that pronouncing names is my kryptonite. If you had a way to weaponize the ability to pronounce names, both fantasy and otherwise, you would have a very effective way of absolutely destroying me. So that's just a little bit of real life Luciano lore for anyone who wants to keep track of that kind of thing. Yeah, names, my weakness. In fact, I'm 90% sure there are multiple things I've mispronounced in this video. It's fine. But multiple years ago, a man who has way too much money and who does not like the fact that he has all this money decided to fund what he initially anticipated to be a doomed expedition. Nonetheless, he thought it was important, and he thought it was a way to potentially get rid of some of his money, potentially put a dent in his very vast coffers. And he funded an expedition to Soteri. That expedition hired Meningitis. All of the Mysterios have disease names. You will realize that very quickly if you actually go and look into the lore, some of which is available on the World Anvil because there's other Mysterios characters. Mysterios are mages who use magic to combat and address supernatural threats. There's more to it than that. There is also a page on the World Anvil for that who wants to learn about that, but effectively they're battle mages. They're not battle mages who are always used in military campaigns, although there often are Mysterioses in military campaigns, but their main purpose is to use their powerful magical abilities against supernatural threats such as other mages and also the extremely real monsters that any prime in this world will encounter once they have been around long enough and have been adventuring long enough. Jonathan has encountered a surprisingly decent and surprisingly diverse set of monsters over the course of their adventure. They have befriended some supernatural beings, including some creatures that would definitely be considered monsters, and they have also fought against and killed many different types of monsters. And I'm very excited to talk about all that in future videos when I talk more about Jonathan specifically and Jonathan's adventures in Ta Mando. But Soteri's as a colony's history begins with that expedition. Meningitis and a number of other significant characters in Jonathan's campaign were a part of that expedition, although an equal number of natives known as Kabori as a civilization are also important parts of this. And very slowly, Jonathan is starting to meet a number of Tando people who are another set of indigenous people native to the region that Soteri is located in. The expedition travels from the core, which is a region, way up here. This version of the map, I've always had a very funny history with this. The core is this region right here. I've always had a very funny time interacting with this map, which explains the mess that you just saw. This map and I do not have the greatest history, even though it is a significant map, especially for Jonathan, who is one of the only characters who could explore it using their own two legs and their ability to fly, just thanks to Jonathan's speed. Earlier, I mentioned that Jonathan was the fastest player prime at the moment. At the moment that is true, I'm pretty sure that there is another prime who is a part of Kanda who might be faster. Isis Smith, who is a non-player prime and is also the reincarnation of one of the founders, might actually be faster than Jonathan, because she's a cyborg and she has cybernetic and cyborg based abilities, so she might be able to travel faster than Jonathan. But Jonathan is the fastest player prime, although that will not always be the case due to the power sets of one of the other player primes who just has not done the same sort of adventuring and the same sort of training that Jonathan has done and has not yet been able to unlock the true maximum potential of her speed. That said, they came from this region and they traveled all the way down over to here. Along the way, they stopped over here, over at the counter of the Earth, before the counter of the Earth, which is another player prime, arrived in her setting, at least to the best of my knowledge. I'm pretty sure that they were there before she was. although some of the people who have met her have met Jonathan and have also met Merrick, another player prime known as the bringer of fertility. So Jonathan's founder name is, or Jonathan's founder epithet is the Maiden of Health, because they are the reincarnation of a woman. This one is the counter of the earth, and then there's the bringer of fertility. There's also the father of war, which was the epithet of the prime that I was talking about earlier, who's a cyborg. There's a few others. I don't want to talk about every single one of them. Jonathan has interacted indirectly with the counter of the earth, although unknowingly. The speaker of truth, the bringer of fertility, and I suspect that that's it. They've interacted through all of these characters, either through other characters or through letters, or in the case of the bringer of fertility, both through other characters and through letters. There is a method, there is a magical ability that people can use to send letters very fast. They use carrier pigeons, and magically enhance them using a magical ritual, which is not super safe to the actual pigeons, but pigeons are built different and can usually endure the ritual at least a few times, and they will travel to other regions. So far, this method has only been used to aid in the sort of sharing of information of people from one region of Kanda to another region, at least as far as I know. Although I know that other civilizations have similar magic, and Jonathan has seen divine ability that facilitates long distance communication. It was used to summon Jonathan for an important adventure that was one of the more recent adventures they went on, that involved a goddess from another region, a region that also had its own primes, because primes are not unique to Kanda. It seems like at some point a civilization will develop enough knowledge to learn how to perform something at least vaguely similar to the founder summoning ritual, which was the ritual that was used to summon Jonathan, Merrick, which is the name of one of the other founders, Isis, again the name of another other founder, Roxanne, another other founder, and the remaining founders, all of whom were, at least to my knowledge, intentionally summoned back through the usages of these powerful rituals. Jonathan arrives in Soteri, finds a note written to them by another prime, a prime that they have since met and interacted with and trained under, named the Master, who is a significant and very powerful prime. And they use the information from that note to avoid making a significant faux pas, and because of that, they were able to make a strong first impression. Jonathan, when they were first summoned to Ta Mando, was a very different person than they are now, and they decided to just sort of revel in the unearned authority that they were given and the unearned respect that the people of Soteri felt that they merited. And fortunately, Jonathan has, in the time since, become someone deserving of the accolades and the respect given to them. At least some of it, maybe not all of it, but Jonathan has undergone a significant bout of character growth and is gradually becoming someone worthy of being worshipped. They also have unique relationships with multiple deities. They are technically serving as the champion of a deity of truth, which is very funny because Jonathan was surprisingly honorable at the start of this campaign, but they weren't honorable because they were honest. They were honorable because they recognized the utility of people trusting you and understood that for people to trust you, you had to behave trustworthily. So because of this, they made grandiose promises and actually more often than not kept them using their superpowers. But when people first arrived in Soteri, at the very least when people from Kanda first arrived in Soteri, they were sent there on what was designed to be a doomed, failed expedition. It was not designed to be a failed, doomed expedition in a way that would permanently wreck the lives of the people who went on it, though that certainly would have been an effect. But it was designed from the start to be a doomed mission by a very rich investor and patron of the arts located in the core who wanted to use some of his vast wealth and he wanted to waste it. So he created the expedition. The expedition went to Soteri. The expedition initially conquered the group of land that became known as Soteri because Soteri is the name of a region. It is the new name of the area where the Kanda live on the bottommost tip of the world. And the land was taken over from natives known as the Kabori. The Kabori were not able to successfully defend themselves, at least in the beginning, from the brutal onslaught of the Kanda because the Kanda trained in a very different style of warfare than the Kabori did. The Kabori were used to guerrilla warfare and were used to using magic to enhance their abilities as well as using poisons to instantly kill their enemies, whereas the Kanda people are brutal, militaristic, and fight in groups, and also they don't do guerrilla warfare, or at least most of them tend not to do guerrilla warfare, and those of them that do are either very, very good at it or very bad at it. So when the Kabori had time to adjust their strategy and begin to plan counterattacks, they began to become decidedly more successful against the people of Soteri. And they began to gradually, just gonna cancel that right now, they began to gradually make headway in their campaign of defeating the people of Soteri. The situation became increasingly dire over the course of a number of years, not just because of the guerrilla warfare campaign being waged by the Kabori, but also because of the fact that the people of Kanda who arrived in Soteri did not understand how different and how difficult it would be to farm in this new region for a number of reasons, most of which are based in just a real world understanding of how farming works that the Kanda people did not have, that the people of Kandia simply didn't have because they've never been to this region of the world. That's not actually true. This was the site of something that was known as the Lost Expedition. It was the final landing point for another group of travelers who wanted to use this region for trade and who wanted to come through this area and who did manage to make it all the way from the region that is known as the core, which is the main continuous section of land controlled by the people of Kanda, and who arrived here, arrived at a temple, and had a very, very, very bad time. Some of them survived, fled, and then managed to have descendants, both and primarily with locals through means that were not always brutal, but were often not great. And they had children who ended up creating a region known as Navokanda. I'm sure you can imagine what Navokanda means just because you know that Kanda is sort of Rome-like. You can imagine loosely what it translates to. And Jonathan has since both learned this history and reconnected with the people of Navokanda, and also begun the process of reconnecting the people of Navokanda with the main core. It is worth noting that this has not been an easy process because in order to survive, the people of Navokanda had to do rules that were very different from mainline Kanda society. And to be fair, so have the people of Soteri. And the people of Navokanda have helped the people of Soteri. Jonathan plans to help the people of Navokanda, both in return for their kindness and also just because in this part of the world, they are the main people from their part of the world, so they should be working together. Things have not always been easy with the people of Navokanda, both for them in their own history and also in their interactions with the people of Soteri, but we are making progress. Things are gradually getting better and everyone is learning from everyone. The people of Navokanda were not super excited to learn about the fact that there were new people from Kanda who were in the region, and also they had a very curious reaction to John when they learned that John was the Maiden of Health, but things are going smoothly. at least as smoothly as they can be. It has certainly been an adventure so far. Jonathan was able to successfully deal with, in ways both bad and good, the local people. Jonathan was able to successfully save tens of thousands of them from a brutal, brutal war and an apocalyptic prophecy. And the many of them are now peacefully integrated and living with the people of Soteri and have formed one sort of unique civilization. Jonathan has also successfully interacted with and saved dozens of Tando, which is the name of another civilization in the region, in case I haven't mentioned that were living under the boot of another prime known as Karen the Witch Queen, whose powers I still don't fully get, but basically she was a very powerful magical person. She was a horrifying demon and a conservative from the United States, presumably from the same Earth as Jonathan, but I don't know if anything ever confirmed that. Jonathan had an encounter with her after she tried to fuck up a bunch of people from Soteri who managed to survive, although not everyone managed to survive, and make it back and tell Jonathan. At that point, Jonathan was still recovering from the escapades of an earlier adventure and was not at 100%, but Jonathan and their wife and some of their other homies went over to Karen's home. They encountered her, they defeated her, and that marks the first instance in Jonathan's campaign of a prime killing another prime, although it is not the only hostile encounter that Jonathan has had with another prime. Jonathan has actually had less than pleasant and less than friendly encounters with several other primes, although prior to dealing with Karen, every single one of those encounters ended peacefully, and more often than not ended with Jonathan making new friends. Jonathan is very, very, very good at making new friends. Part of the reason why Jonathan is so great at making new homies is because when a prime is created, at least the newest set of primes, as far as I understand it, this might not have always been the case. When a prime is created, the player themselves selects two sets of abilities to give their prime. What I ended up giving Jonathan is Superman's abilities and also something called Social Mastery. Social Mastery is a set of powers that makes it so that someone can be social a lot more easily. It's something that includes, in Jonathan's case, the ability to talk to animals and the ability to talk to plants, as well as boosts to your overall charisma. And Jonathan has used that to truly incredible degrees. It's also worth noting that some of Superman's abilities, at least as we are using Superman, include omnilingualism, which would have eventually been the case for Social Mastery. So people who have Social Mastery eventually would have gained omnilingualism, but Jonathan gained omnilingualism through their connection to Superman's power set. So because of that, Jonathan is also just objectively incredibly good at making friends. And this is something that has already begun to radically transform the world that Jonathan is in through a series of adventures where the ultimate payoff has not yet occurred, but the basic gist of it is that Jonathan went to a whole new part of the world map. Jonathan made some friends, and Jonathan's new friends were attacked, but Jonathan was able to go and peacefully defuse the situation with next to no violence, not quite no violence, but a remarkably small amount of violence, and ultimately set forth a series of conditions which will culminate in many, many, many years, both in-game and out of game, in a radically transformed world map. Although Jonathan does not yet understand the full scale and scope of their actions, they did a very good thing, saved a lot of people's lives, and made it possible for two very distant nations to begin the process of reconnecting. And when I say distant nations, I don't mean like the two countries hate each other. In fact, the two countries really like each other. I mean distant physically. They are on very opposite sides of this particular map, and they were once connected through a land route that effectively no longer exists. and it has made communication between the two of them difficult, but Jonathan inadvertently set about correcting that over the course of their adventures in the Place of Peace. And that is significant. I'm definitely going to talk about that at length in a future video. That said, I think that this video has gone on long enough. I am so excited to talk more about Ta Mando. Ta Mando is one of my favorite things. I know, honestly, a ridiculous amount of lore. I both know a lot of lore and I know no lore at the same time. It is remarkable how fleshed out this world has been, and I'm so excited to get to talk to all of you and also to get to share videos with Shy and other players where we talk about this at greater detail. Anyways, I hope that you all have a wonderful day, and I cannot wait to see you again.